Hi, I'm Andrew Berry and welcome to At the Bench. We're carrying on with our series on soldering. I've shown you what equipment you need. I showed you how soldering techniques and the conditions that solder loves to be able to solder perfectly. And the most simplest type of piece of jewellery to make up once you've learned how to solder is a simple band. A simple wedding band. It could be a stacker ring band, and we're going to be making up a very simple D section band. I say band like a ring, plain ring. Any type of section metal will do. It can be round section, it can be square section, it can be rectangular section, it can be D section. And what do I mean by D section? The part traditionally that goes against the finger is flat, and the outside of the section of metal is rounded. So it's a profile like a letter D. Simple. And this can be obtained in all different types of widths and thicknesses from your bullion dealer. Today we've got a nice wide piece here. This piece is 6 millimeters in width. The depth is 2 millimeters, and the length is really longer than what I need. This is a piece that's nearly 13 centimeters, way longer than what I need. And I would always advise you, when you buy your metal, buy it longer than what you actually need. So say you wanted a length of metal that was 65 millimeters in length. You'll notice that when the bullion dealers cut the ends, they cut them with a shears or pliers. So the last millimeter, 2 millimeters, you can't use because that's where the ends have been squashed. I think this end has been cut because I think I've used this previously. So you always have to allow an extra couple of millimeters for the bullion dealers chopping off the strip. Also, when it comes to making up the band, it always pays to have that couple of extra millimeters again. It just makes life easier. It makes your finished item a lot more professional. And I'll come to that in a minute and I'll show you exactly why. You can make up the ring to a specific size. There are lots of charts and tables out on the internet. Here at the Bench, our online training website, we have a resources table. I'll put the link down below in the description where you can download our resources ring blank sizes table. You may have to be a Freeview member. It doesn't cost anything to join. All we need is a name and an email address, and you get access to the Freeview section of At the Bench, and you got access to all our resources. Ideal. Print it out, laminate it, keep it by your bench. That's atthebench.com. From that, and I'll use this as an example, I just said that our silver was 2 millimeters in thickness. This is the UK, United Kingdom version, because we measure our finger sizes in letters of the alphabet. In other parts of the world, in the US of A, you use numbers, and there's lots of other countries that use their own systems. I think we've got an international chart on At the Bench as well. But using this particular chart here, along the top here we've got the thickness of the metal that you're using. In our case, 2 millimeters. I have to excuse the dirt on my table here. So there's 2 millimeters here. So down this column is where we need to look. And then if you are making the ring to a specific finger size, well then the finger sizes are down the left hand side here. And at the moment the table runs from F to Z plus 6. So say I want to make a ring in the size of, say, a size R. We come along from an R, come across to the 2 millimeter column, and the length that we need to make our ring blank is 65.4 millimeters. I wouldn't worry too much about the 0.4 of a millimeter. I would always err on the fraction smaller, knowing that you can tap the ring slightly larger upon your ring mandrel. It's easier to do that than make it too big And then if you don't have the tools to do it, to reduce it, you'd actually have to cut the ring, take a piece out, resolder it, and try all over again. So I'm going to make the ring 65 millimeters, the length of 65 millimeters. If I was ordering that from a bullion dealer, I would add on, about 2 millimeters on either side for chopping it off. Plus I'd add on another 2 or 3 millimeters each side as well. It's going to make life a lot easier when we come to bend the ring round. And again, I'll show you that in a minute. So 65 millimeters I need. If I'm ordering it from a bullion dealers, I'd order 65, so I'd order, that's close to 70. I would order roughly around about 76, 78 millimeters in length. And I know we're going to have pieces that we're going to be cutting off, but we save them. None of it gets wasted, and we can save them, and we can melt that down to make some balls, some embellishments. We can melt it quite a bit down to make an ingot, and we can do so much more with that little scrap silver. So it's never ever wasted. You never throw it away. So let's have a look at this bit of silver. 65 millimeters. Let's get my scribe, and using the equipment that I showed you at the first film of this soldering series. And again, if you haven't seen that, I'll put the link down below, and you can go and visit the 2 previous films showing you the equipment we need and how to solder. 65 millimeters. So we would never measure from the ends, okay? Because that is where the bullion company has cut, blah, 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 and so forth. And I would also come in a little bit. So in this bit of silver here, I'm going to come in roughly round about 5 millimeters from the end. I will simply put a mark going across my silver. 65.4, my chart said. I'm going to do it to 65 millimeters. So here's 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 65 is there. You can see my piece of silver is much, much longer than what I actually need. So if this was yours would be approximately that sort of length, about 70, 75 millimeters if you were making this to a size R. But you would make this to whatever size you want and then add on that little bit extra on either end. Right, this is something that I have learned over the past 30 years. You do not cut the silver just yet. It is so tempted to come along to cut across there, to cut across there. But we have been so accurate measuring this out. The last thing that you want to do is to cut here, cut there, and then start filing the ends, because these ends are going to have to be parallel with each other. If we cut this one like that and cut this one this way, completely wonky, we have to file the ends. And as soon as you start to file the ends of your silver, you're making the silver shorter. And by making the silver shorter, you're altering the finger size, you're altering the ring size of what you originally measured. So don't cut just yet. And this is where I was saying about having that little bit extra on either end. It helps you with the next task. Get a pair of pliers. These pliers have a nice rounded jaw. The bottom jaw is rounded, the top jaw here is flat. Okay? So these are half round pliers. Here's our first mark that we put on here. We allowed a couple of millimeters from the end for the bullion dealer's cut. We added that extra on. So here's my mark here now. Now what I like to see is where the ends of the ring come up. I don't like to see people soldering the ring straight like that. All right? It's very hard for you to see, I know. I like to see the ring bending so it curves round. So when you come to tap the ring round, you don't put stress on the joint. If you have the metal coming along straight and you solder it, you've got to bend the ring round and you're putting unnecessary stress and strain on that joint. You have the ring coming round, so the ends are coming round nicely curved like this, and you solder. The ring is virtually round. You're putting less stress on the ring. I'll show you now. So by having that little bit extra on the end here, we can ensure that this part of the ring that we actually need is going to be nice. The ends are going to come round and it's going to be lovely and curved. Let me just quickly demonstrate what I mean. So flat goes against the finger. In this case, that is where the rounded jaw is, like that. We hold on to the end, we push this around. And what you're going to see is that here's our line here. You can see now where the curve is carrying on to where the line is. Come to the end and you can see how the end is straight. So what I will be doing is cutting off here, and you can see we've got that lovely curve leading up to the join. What you don't want is to have a flat section by here. So that's our mark there. We are going to just simply turn this around, and here is our second mark just over here. And again, I want to make sure that when I turn the ring around and I'm moving the ring around, a couple of millimeters move it, couple of millimeters move it, and I'm making sure that we get a nice curve all the way around. I could make that a little bit tighter. And where our mark is by here, I want to curve the metal further. So I don't want to come along and have from the line straight. The metal has to curve. So we've got the first mark here where it's nicely curved. Our second mark is here where it's nicely curved. Right, here's another little trick for you. And again, this is some tricks that I have learned over my 30 years of making jewelry. We have to make sure, as I just said 2-3 minutes ago, that the ends of these wires have to be parallel. They need to come together absolutely parallel. There's not much point one being wonky and then we've got to file this flat so they come together, because you're altering the finger size. What we need to do is to keep the metal on the peg and keep it in this position. Keep it flat. So this one side is flat on the peg. I will come along and I will cut through my first original mark here. Then I will keep the metal and I will cut on here. So if the first cut, and I'll use my ruler as a guide here to show you, if my first cut comes along and is completely wonky, and I can say the word wonky, and it's not straight, it's at that angle, and then I come along and cut the next edge, or my next mark, sorry, at that funny angle, I know that those sides, as angled as they're going to be, are going to come together parallel. If I cut this one at this angle and then turn the ring over and cut this one at this angle, well then my sides are not going to come together. They're going to be touching and I need to have the joint nice and tight all the way along. But I'll show you now. You may not understand what I mean, but let me just quickly show you. So let's just transfer my mark to the top of the ring so I can see there, and likewise with this one. There it is there. Okay, so I'm cutting as straight as I possibly can. Everyone has their own natural cut, and I'm sawing as vertical as I can, and I'm cutting towards the center of the ring all the time. Not just by cutting like this, cutting away. I'm always trying to cut at 90 degrees to the surface. Okay, gentle movements up and down, cutting towards the ring. That little piece we will keep and we will reuse. So I'm keeping the metal, I'm keeping the ring on my peg, just simply turning it around now to where my next mark is. And again, from there, use my thumb as a guide, cut through. And again, I'm aiming towards the center of the ring all the time. Okay, there we go. And again, obviously that piece I'm going to keep. Sawing always kicks up a little bit of a burr that you need to get rid of. You can just file that off. I'm not filing the face, I just want to file off that bit of burr. So those are my two cuts. You can see how it's curved right where I've cut it, and you can see how it's curved here right where I've cut it. Now I can bend this ring a bit further round now, and when I bring that together, you'll see that the faces of the ring are going to come together absolutely perfectly. All right, so we're getting near. You can see how parallel they are. Nearer, 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 nearer. And when we come to bring them face to face, you will see, I know I've got a bit of a step here, but I'm just going to sort that out. But you can see how parallel those lines, the ends are. I don't have to worry about having to file the ends. As soon as you start to file it, you're making the ring smaller, which is not what you want to do. I haven't wasted any more metal by doing what I'm doing here. A much easier, more accurate, quicker ring, I will guarantee and I will promise you. So we need to make sure that the sides of this ring are completely straight. And we need to make sure that the faces of this ring come together flush all the way from front to back. So this is quite a thick piece of silver. If you haven't got strong hands, you may have a few problems trying to maneuver it into shape. I'm just simply pushing, pulling the ring. So that is the most perfect solder joint. The solder is going to love that joint. It's perfect. It's exactly what we're after. If you want to make sure that you have no burrs in between, get a piece of emery paper, pass it in between, and move the emery paper in between the joints just to make sure it really is completely flush. Use the same piece of paper, just clean up the outside as well, because again, that solder will only flow on silver that has the cleanest surface. In the inside, I'm just going to use a needle file. Like that there. So that is the most perfect joint ready to be soldered. I'm using my flux and I'm making sure that I put the flux from the inside and also on the outside, because the capillary action will take that flux into that joint. Some people will open up the ring, they'll put a bit of solder in between the joint and then use the tension of the ring to hold it back. I don't like to do that. I like to keep that ring, like to keep the joint closed all the time, and that's looking really good. We're going to be using some hard solder on this. Hard solder means solder that melts at quite a high temperature. It's always nice to get into the hang of things of using hard solder for your first soldering joint. I've got a small little piece of solder. It may look tiny to you. That's the size I've got there. It does look very small, but the solder only has to flow between the face of each piece of silver. It only has to go between the joint itself. There may be some excess that will just flow onto the outside, but the more solder that gets flowed, that's such a word, on the outside of the ring, the more you've got to file off, and that to me is a complete waste. I'm using the little propane torch, the butane torch that I've got here. This is quite a thick ring, so it's going to take a little while to warm this up. I'm going to put the flame towards the back of the ring. That's the front of the ring for you. And that's going to warm up the ring. And by doing that, what is happening is the water is evaporating from the flux that we put into this area here. What I'm just quickly going to do is put a little bit of flux on that piece of solder that I've got by there as well. That'll help the solder melt a lot easier. The water is evaporating. from our flux that we've got here. You can see the color of the flux, okay? The flux is a good indication of knowing when the silver is going to be the right temperature for our solder to melt. Don't put the solder on just yet. The solder is going to overheat. You can overheat solder and it will lose its flowing properties. So I've warmed up the the back of the ring here. I've got my solder. You can see the color of the flux. The flux has kept the area that I want to solder nice and clean. Looks brown to you, but telling you now that is gorgeous and clean underneath that bit of flux. Here's my bit of solder. Just pop it up onto the top. You don't want to put the flame on the solder directly. We're relying on the heat of the silver to melt that solder. So bring the flame now to the front of the ring, put it on either side. The solder will flow towards the hottest part of the ring, so you have to make sure that both sides of the ring are the same temperature. The solder just started to boil up a little bit then, so I know we're very close. Look at the flux. Any second now, this solder is going to flow, and the solder is going to flow, there we go, exactly where we want it. It's flowing down the center where we have put that flux. You can see what happens. The solder starts to flow. It becomes jelly-like. People will stop at that and think it's flowed or hasn't flowed far enough. The solder will flow a little bit further if you keep the heat onto it. I brought the flame to the inside of the ring now because I want to make sure the solder gets pulled through to the inside of the ring here, and you can see we've got that lovely seam of solder coming through on the inside. It's gone from front to back, top to bottom, and that is the most gorgeous, gorgeous solder joint. It may look dirty, it may look scuzzy to you, but that is the actual flux that has made that bit of colouring around here. The ring has got some oxides on it. We need to put that into some acid, and in our next film I will then show you how to clean the ring up and to polish it, to bring it up nice and shiny. So I'm going to put it in my safety pickle now. Don't put it in the pickle straight away. A lot of people will wait for it to cool down, then put it in the warm acid. I always put the ring into the warm acid when the ring is warm. I find it cleans the ring quicker. You don't want to put the ring straight into the acid as soon as you've soldered it. Because the sudden shock of the metal cooling is going to fracture the joint. It's going to fracture the solder joint. And when you start to tap the ring round, it will split. It's not what we're after. So you don't need to wait this length of time before we put it into the acid. I'm just talking to you. But literally wait about 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Let the ring cool down to what we call a black heat. That is a look of the ring where there's no color change to it. There's no redness to it. The redness has gone completely and we're to a black heat. This is way past it now. This is quite a cool ring now. But we would put it into the acid within about 10 seconds of soldering it. Leave it in there until the ring comes up nice and white. The safety pickle will also get rid of the flux as well, the excess flux, as you can see. That's what all the brown bits are on the front of the ring there. This area is nice and white, nice and clear, nice and shiny, because that is where our flux was. The rest of the ring, as you can see, is oxidized because there is no flux on it. But the area where the flux was is kept the silver clean. It kept it just right for that solder to flow. I'm going to pop that into the acid now, wait a few minutes to get that nice bright and white, and then I'll show you then how to clean up the ring, tap it round and polish it.